They came under the moonlight, masked, merciless, unannounced. That haunting image stays with you. A serene medieval village shaken at dawn. Goult, an idyllic corner of southeastern France, its cobbled lanes and honey-colored stone houses bathed in history, had never known such horror. But on that early June morning, a wedding party became a battlefield. A joyous celebration turned burned into grief when masked assailants descended, bullets ripping through the stillness. In the heart of the province countryside, Goult is a dreamscape. Stone-built streets, vibrant vineyards, and just 1,000 souls sharing more than a century of quiet tradition. Into this picture-perfect setting came 27-year-old bride, Sophie and her 25-year-old groom, Marc. Their love story felt like a fairy tale. Sophie, radiant, full of warmth, planning a future, and Marc, steady, devoted, had tied the knot in a simple, heartfelt ceremony in March and reserved the village hall, a rustic embrace of communal joy. On June 22nd, as their wedding came to life, there were 28 guests, family, friends, neighbors, ready to fill the night with laughter, music, and dancing under the stars. Among them, sources later revealed, may have been their 13-year-old son, a quiet, curious boy, his eyes reflecting the excitement of his parents' celebration. At around 4:30 a.m., as night surrendered to dawn, Sophie and Marc left the hall, stepping into the cool air to end their perfect night. That's what happened. Two masked gunmen, emerging from the shadows, assault rifles in hand. The first burst of gunfire echoed in the alley. Sophie collapsed, struck in the chest. Marc screamed her name as he shoved his son to the ground and pressed the accelerator. In the chaos, an assailant appeared in the headlights. Marc, desperate and disoriented, couldn't stop in time. The car mounted the pavement and the gunman fell. Another shooter returned fire as they sped away, bullets tearing into the car, grazing Marc and painfully wounding the 13-year-old. The attackers fled on foot. Witnesses say Sophie died instantly, her dreams extinguished in a moment of terror. The groom and the child were gravely hurt, rushed to a nearby hospital. The investigation opened with the Avignon prosecutor's office slapping the label, murder and attempted murder by an organized gang. Authorities descended on the scene. Police cars blocking roads, helicopters circled overhead, drones combed vineyards. Photographs of shell casings, bullet trajectories, tire skid marks, and footprints filled evidence tents. Neighbors spoke of strange cars parked nearby all day. Witnesses mentioned unusual traffic, hushed conversations, someone wearing a ski mask darting through yards. At first, police considered a robbery gone wrong, but as shells were matched to weapons linked with Marseille drug networks, a harsher truth emerged. This was retribution. A source close to the investigation told AFP that local dealers seldom treaded on Goult's quiet cobblestones, but that night, the violence had spilled in. Underneath the veneer of celebration, investigators found markers of a drug-related score settling, coded phone records, unusual cell phone pings near the Hull farm to Marseille gangs, and a Ferrari tied to a rising player in the narcotics trade. Red herrings followed. One suspect, a man who'd threatened Sophie after a business dispute. He had no weapon, his alibi held. Another, an ex with a grudge. No proof. Every lead turned cold, until breakthroughs came in the form of a bullet casing traced through the National Ballistics Database. It matched 3 other scenes, 2 in Marseille, 1 in Nice. Each scene was also tied to drug payback. Thin threads now wove together a larger scheme. Then 2 men were arrested. They were low-level foot soldiers. Interrogation painted a chilling picture. They'd been hired by a regional boss furious over stolen shipments. The boss had ordered a message, delivered not to dealers, but to a wedding to get attention. The masked shooters were meant to terrorize. Sophie wasn't a target, she was collateral. Psychological depth shines through this tragedy. Sophie, a lively spirit, had wanted to build a life full of love, laughter, perhaps extend her little family. Marc, fiercely protective, is now haunted by the sound of that gunfire, the helpless scream as he hit the gas. He watches his son, fragile in bed, tears in his eyes, not afraid of darkness, but missing his mother. Inside the Marseille underworld, there is a young shooter, just 20, kneeling, mask dripping with sweat, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He never met Sophie. He never spoke to Marc, but his finger found the trigger. He was scared, pressured, a child himself, trapped in a toxic cycle of obedience and violence. One pulled trigger, one died. Investigators, led by Avignon prosecutor Florence Goult, worked long nights sifting through phone records, mapping out the network. There was guilt in every file. They knew they were chasing kids turned killers, pawns in a game they didn't understand. The detectives felt sorrow for Sophie, frustration at the system that allowed poison to seep into peaceful villages. Meanwhile, Goult's community was stunned. Mayor Didier Perello marched through the carnage, fury in his eyes. "I'm angry. I am outraged. I rule nothing out." He'd said Goult hadn't seen major violence in 125 years. Now champagne to blood in hours. Families locked their doors. The wedding hall stood vacant, echoing with grief. Twists and turns kept investigators off balance. First, they believed Sophie or Marc had ties to trafficking. Both were deeply embedded in local life. She sold handmade pottery. He ran a small vineyard. Their records were clean. That theory died. Another lead. The possibility this was a case of mistaken identity. Another couple, perhaps known to drug networks, had booked the hall. But booking records showed Sophie and Marc had tied the knot in March, not under false names. Then came surveillance video, night vision grainy footage of a silver sedan creeping onto the village outskirts. That car had skipped toll booths and remained off radar, until license plate triangle fragments and a microchip scanner cracked it. It was rented under a pseudonym, then moved to Marseille 2 hours before the shooting. The rented VIN tied it to a gas station attendant, a terrified man coerced into driving shooters. He pointed them to the wedding hall, thinking it was a drug meeting. The pieces clicked. Resolution came quietly. The two gunmen, one captured by helicopter netting, the other pinned near a vineyard. They confessed to acting on orders from a Marseille kingpin outraged at missing, unseen killers. The shooters were arrested, tried, convicted of Sophie's murder and the attempted murder of Marc and the child. The ringleader, still at large, faces an international manhunt. The broader impact: Sophie's death became a symbol, sparking protests in Provence, petitions demanding drug policy reform, heavier penalties for trafficking networks. France's Interior Ministry pledged to bolster rural policing, drone patrols, and wiretaps. For Goult, healing began slowly. The mayor led candlelight vigils. Villagers planted an olive grove outside the hall, each tree engraved with Sophie's name. As closing thoughts, Goult is forever changed, a serene village scarred by the nightmares of violence, but also united. Families supporting Marc and his son, neighbors holding hands across breakfast tables. The village hall transforming from a crime scene into a community center of remembrance and solidarity. Sophie's legacy endures in the vines that bloom, 7 rings for peace, and a reminder that even in nightmares, communities can choose love over fear. This is not just a true crime retelling. It's Sophie's wandering spirit among the olive trees, Marc's silent vow at dawn, a boy's tender memory of laughter before the gunfire. It's a community refusing to let shadows overtake light, and a solemn call that even the most peaceful places are not immune to the dark currents of the world.